your body is just trying to protect yourself. So it's very interesting how we learn how to cope.
So welcome to this episode of Finding Your Range podcast with me, Jeannie. This is the podcast which looks into hypermobility, EDS and chronic pain. And I'm delighted to be joined again by a familiar face. You might recognize her from our season 1 podcasts. We're joined by Keeya Steel. So welcome, Keeya. Really great to have you back.
Thanks for having me again. I really enjoyed our conversation last time, and I'm sure this will be wonderful as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I know your last podcast. So if you haven't watched Keeya's first podcast with us last year, please head over and have a look at that, because it's going to be quite an interesting one this time. I think you're going to have a different perspective, and I'm really excited to find out more about it. But before we get started, let me just tell you a little bit about what's going on in Keeya's life at the moment. So after a lifetime of symptoms, Keeya Steel was diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome in 2015. Soon after, in an effort to cope with the disease, Keeya created Hells, Bells and Mast Cells, a blog and collection of memes raising awareness about chronic illness and disability through humour. This past spring, thanks to a new medication, Keeya's MCAS symptoms, or mast cell symptoms, went into remission. Her daily dysautonomia and EDS symptoms also disappeared. Keeya lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her 2 poodles, Quixote and Sancho. And if you've seen Keeya's Instagram page, which is called Hells, Bells and Mast Cells, you'll see her lovely dogs featured on there all the time, and they're adorable. So there we go. Welcome, Keeya.
Thank you.
So we mentioned in your bio, obviously, that things have changed quite a bit for you this year, which is really exciting. But before we get into that and what's going on, some of our listeners might be new to this and they might not know what mast cell activation syndrome is. So could you give us a little resume of that and how it might be impacting somebody's life?
Definitely. I think I'm getting better at this. I think describing mast cell activation syndrome, it's so complex. So it's hard to do an elevator speech. But basically, everyone has mast cells. Mast cells are part of your immune system, and they're the first line of defense. So if you have an injury or an infection, your mast cells are gonna go and, try to protect your body. Mast cell activation syndrome occurs when your mast cells, these white blood cells, become overactive, and they no longer can distinguish between true danger, like an infection, or something that's not harmful, like the sun or types of foods. And they just start releasing chemicals all over your body all the time in excessive amounts. And so mast cells release more than 200 chemicals that can cause inflammation and all sorts of problems throughout the body. They can cause symptoms like fatigue, anxiety, joint pain, nausea, bloating, swelling, migraine. I'm not gonna, but it can just about anything. So, because they're causing inflammation throughout your body, so it can affect any organ. And I had a severe case of mast cell activation syndrome, but the MCAS can range a whole spectrum. So, someone might just have more fatigue more than usual, or have migraines once in a while, GI symptoms, anxiety or sleep issues can be common. It's really a whole spectrum. And we don't know why mast cell activation occurs. We don't know the genetic reason, why people are more predisposed to having overactive mast cells, but we do know that there are things in our environment that can make them more overactive. And those things are like infections, chemicals, toxins, physical trauma and psychological stress. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, I was born with strep, which is an infection, and it's really hard on an infant's immune system. So
Yeah.
most likely that was one of the triggers that made my mast cells overactive. And later on in my life, for example, I ran for political office, and that is a huge psychological stressor. I do
Wow.
not recommend it if you have mast cell disease. Or maybe at all. I don't know. But and that I notice a severe worsening of my symptoms and my mast cells.
Yes.
Um, and then and then there are common triggers. Everyone is different with mast cell disease, and everyone benefits from different treatments. Mast cells are very individual. So some of my personal triggers were like high histamine foods, the sun, heat, fragrances were huge. So I lived a very isolated life, and I only had like 15 foods that I could safely eat. When I exercised, it would make me sick, but it's good to keep moving for other reasons.
Mm.
I had a very restricted life to minimize my mast cells from releasing chemicals throughout my body.
Amazing. Gosh. And I'm hearing that we're putting all of that in the past tense now, which is
Yes.
really exciting. So if somebody's listened to what you've just said and is like, wow, that sounds like me, what should they do about it? Who can they see?
Yeah, and it's also very common to have mast cell activation syndrome if you have dysautonomia or POTS or ehlers-danlos syndrome and hypermobility.
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, you would go to a mast cell disease specialist and you would have urine and blood tests to measure those chemicals that mast cells are releasing in your body. However, those tests are not reliable at this time. So I had 5 positive tests, but at that point, my body was drowning in those chemicals. So it's much harder to capture those results in someone that is not experiencing symptoms all the time, or has a less amount of chemicals, because like heat degrades those chemicals very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, tracking your symptoms and sharing them with your doctor, and then also working with your doctor to try some of the first lines of treatment for mast cell activation syndrome. So those are like your antihistamines, and there are other first lines of treatment that are over the counter or supplements, such as like vitamin D that stabilize mast cells, that are good options for working with your doctor. And then at home, start experimenting with food. Learn what low histamine food is. Start, tracking what triggers, like, are certain activities, are fragrant. If fragrances are making you sick, cut those out of your life.
Yeah.
And advocate for people around you to wear fragrance-free products. That will really help your mast cells from escalating and getting more defensive and dumping those chemicals in your body. Any measures you can take to kind of make the mast cells happy is definitely worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Fragrances are an absolute nightmare, I think. If I'm just walking down the street behind someone who's wearing a potent aftershave or perfume, I have to get out the way, because I can immediately, like you say, they go on red alert, and I can feel a headache almost instantly. And I'm like, whoa, it's terrible. But you can't tell strangers, obviously, or if you're on a bus or a tube, you can't tell strangers to please don't wear the perfume. It's really difficult, really difficult.
Yeah, I developed some weird coping mechanisms where, so one day someone noticed that I only walk in a hallway, I walk along the wall, because that's where there's the least trail of perfume. That's usually in the center of the hallway. So I like all this, your body is just trying to protect yourself. So it's very interesting how we learn how to cope, like on a bus where you sit, and if you wear a mask, that can help kind of get some of that fragrance. There's definitely some small ways to avoid and defend your body.
Yeah. And at least wearing masks now, you can not look weird, because in theory, everyone should be wearing a mask, but anyway, when you're on a bus.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that's a positive of having to wear a mask. It can help with that. Now, it was Mast Cell Activation Awareness Day last week. What date is it?
October 20th.
October 20th. So yes. And you created this really cute little video, and you got together a group of people just basically talking about mast cell. And it was a very positive video. So what hope is there for people who are living with this condition?
Yeah, it's changed a lot since I got diagnosed in 2015. When I was diagnosed in 2015, they're like, you might have this mast cell thing. My gastroenterologist told me, and he sent me to hematology, and I was waiting for my appointment and nervous, and I didn't know what it mean. And I looked online, and mast cell activation syndrome was not on Google. So there was mastocytosis, which is a different kind of mast cell disease, and mast cell leukemia. So I didn't know if I had weeks to live, or like I had no idea what a mast cell was. That has changed.
Yeah.
There was no Mast Cell Disease Awareness Day, and the first Mast Cell Disease Awareness Day was in 2018. And at that time, people were still referring to MCAS as rare. And a lot of doctors were still not believing, dismissing patients' diagnoses, because it is not taught, at that time, it was not taught in medical school. And there wasn't consensus on what mast cell activation syndrome looked like. There still isn't, but we know now mast cell activation syndrome is probably more prevalent than we thought. Again, because we don't have access to reliable testing, we can't measure it at this time. But there is a small but strong community of mast cell disease doctors and patients and advocates and caregivers. And the point of this video was to show that as an MCAS patient, you are not alone. There are people that are now working together and recognize that this is a growing problem, and we need access to testing and treatments and more awareness about fragrance-free accessibility. But there are people who are working really hard and really do understand that it's complex and it's challenging. And I had nights alone in 2016 where I just felt like, okay, I know there's one specialist out there working for me, and that was all I held on to at that time. Like, I just wanted to give up because my body was in so much pain and I was so exhausted. And I know that sometimes just looking at those people who are doing the work is enough to just hang on to the next moment when your body settles down.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you.
And you're one of those people, Jeannie.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
Oh, no. Well, thank you for inviting me to be on the video. It was a pleasure. I'm, as you know, and some of our listeners will know, I also have this condition, which I only found out about, where are we, 3 years ago, maybe now, so mine accumulated in my bladder and a whole long issues of horrible bladder issues, which I won't go into now, but that's how I got diagnosed. And then all the other things make sense, why I don't like certain foods and why I can't tolerate fragrances and why I come out in a rash when I go in the sun, and all these things that you just thought, okay, what's that all about? But yeah, they all come under this umbrella. So yes, I'm very happy to do my bit, because it is possible to, obviously, like you say, manage it and live with it. And there are things you can do. And for me, stress is a big, big trigger. So when I'm stressed, they all get very excited and things start, kicking off again. So I have to manage my stress. And of course, movement is a great way for me to de-stress. So yeah. All right. So as we talked about, we've hinted about, you've gone into remission, which is, I watch your account in awe, and I'm like, oh, I want that to be me. And I'm sure other people are thinking they want to, that's, so how did this happen? And what happened?
It's a wild story, but that's what Hell's Bells and Mast Cells is all about. So I went to the AKC National Agility Championship in Tulsa in March, and I thought that was like the peak of my year. I got to compete as a disabled athlete with my dog, and we did okay, but we ended up on ESPN, and which is like a sports channel, and I felt like a true athlete, and all my friends and family got to watch me on TV, and I got to share my story as a disabled athlete, and it wasn't so much about like winning the ribbons, but showing up and enjoying the experience. So I was like, this is the highlight, I'm done, like. And I went home, and a week later, my ankle was itching, and I looked down, and there was a big fat engorged tick on my ankle, and I honestly thought, oh no, it's all over. Because I know what tick infections can do from, tick infections can increase mast cell activation, just like other infections. Yeah. And I thought, I'm done. My mast cells can't handle this. And I got on an antibiotic within 24 hours. Within 24 hours, I had lesions all over my body, and my Achilles tendons were so inflamed, I could no longer walk. I went to put like a bed sheet on my ankle, and the weight of the bed sheet made me scream and cry. And I've been through a lot, so I have a high pain tolerance, and I could not handle a bed sheet. So I have a true understanding of how tick infections can affect your connective tissue. It was like it went straight for that tendon, and I couldn't walk for like a week and a half. But I started Doxycycline, an antibiotic that treats tick infections. I had the tick sent to tick autopsy land, and all of the bacteria that we can test for, it tested negative for. So it was a Lone Star tick, and it's unclear what infection I had. But the infection did start going away about a week and a half later. And I just noticed sometimes with mast cell activation syndrome, when your mast cells have a job to do, when they're fighting an infection or, helping with an injury, I feel in my experience that they are busy, and I have more of a capacity to do some of the things that I couldn't before, like be around people with a little bit of fragrance or eat foods that are triggering, such as like tomatoes. And for some reason, I started craving tamales, and I started eating like tamales every day. So that's like jalapenos, cheese, corn, like all not, but I just kept eating them, and I felt so miserable otherwise and so much pain. I was like, okay, whatever. I finally was able to, this is a wild story. We're not even at the wild part, So, I finally felt good enough to walk. So I went to get my hair cut, and the lady's cutting my hair. And so in the past, haircuts have been terrifically painful for me and take like 2 days to recover, because there are so many scents in the salon. Yes. And I physically have to get there. I have to sit there, and that it makes me sick every time. And she's cutting my hair, and I'm like, I feel pretty good. And she's like, well, I was like, I'm not reacting to any fragrances. And she's like, well, how about I style your hair? Now, I haven't had my hair styled for 6 years. I had to wash my hair at home because I couldn't use their products, So I'm like, okay. So she styles my hair, and I'm like, it smells like orange dreamsicles. And in my experience, my mast cells make chemicals smell like chemicals. And I can't smell the pretty fragrances when I'm activated. Like perfume smells like death and toxic disaster to me, not like gardens and meadows. Yeah. So I'm like, this smells pretty good. I was like, I think I might be in remission. Like I'm eating all this stuff. This is where the story gets a little weird. And she says, why don't you go have a drink? So, and I was like, Okay, that sounds like terrible advice normally, but alcohol is a very high histamine substance. And I was like, this is the way to test it. This is the way to figure it out. So I went to the liquor store. I picked up a bottle of rosé. I went home. I had a glass of rosé, and I was like, oh, it's on. Like, there were no rashes. There was nothing, no swelling, no vomiting. I just got a little buzzed, and I called my mom and I said, we need to go to the bar right now. I think I'm in remission. She's like, I have canoe lessons tonight. I was like, I think I'm in remission. We are going to the bar. So she picks me up. I ordered like everything. I ordered cheesecake, Buffalo Wild Wings, bruschetta, tequila, like just a whole smorgasbord of food. And I just started like mowing down. It's a terrible combination, but I just like wanted to see if I reacted. And she brought like friends, and we hung out and we were chatting and drinking, and it just kept escalating from there. But like,
wow,
it was just amazing that, so it was the doxycycline, which a small subset of mast cell activation syndrome patients anecdotally do a lot better on doxycycline. But for me, it was like a switch, and I don't know why it was so dramatic, because again, I didn't even get to celebrate Christmas with my family because I was so reactive. I couldn't have my mom and dad over to my condo even when I really wanted to. And my birthday was like 3 days later. And so after realizing I was in remission, so I was like, all right, so I want 2 cakes and I want 35 candles on them, because now I can blow out candles for the first time. And I'm not allergic to flowers, so please like give me all the flowers. And I want people over, like they wore masks and it was a small party, but I hadn't had that in 6 years.
Wow.
And it was incredible. And it was just so much fun. And then, you know, the next day I left for Florida because I just kept ramping it up. So
that's amazing. That's just amazing. We can see how happy you are as well, the sheer joy on your face when you're talking about it. It's incredible.
Absolutely.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And how long has this been? Sorry,
this is my seventh. No, this is my 7th month. And I'm just going to get more excited. I have excessive energy now. And I just want to say that, like, so doxycycline probably won't work for other people. And I get contacted all the time and people say, well, what medications are you on?
Yeah.
And the doxycycline would not have worked if I had not done the work of trying the first lines of treatments and the second lines of treatment. So I'm still on like a basic mix of first line treatments.
Yeah.
The doxycycline alone, I take doxycycline every day now to inhibit my mast cell reactions, but I also take the first lines of treatment that work for me. Yeah. And unfortunately, if I tell you exactly what I am taking, it will not only not be helpful, but it'll probably waste your time, because you need to go through the steps of trying, not just, so there are different types of H1 blockers, and you got to figure out which type works for you. So they're not just different medications, but there are different types of medications within those classes. It's a lot of work, and I understand it's super frustrating. It took me 5 years to get here, and it's very hard when you feel like you feel like you're dying. You're having life-threatening reactions. I almost lost my job. I almost lost my house. But there is hope, and hopefully we'll learn more so that this trial and error process can be shorter, and that we know more about medications. I talk about doxycycline because I do want people to know it is an option when you don't have options anymore. So my stomach was bleeding. That's very serious. That can be life-threatening. And when I started doxycycline, my stomach healed a lot of people ask me about like worrying about my gut. I was worried about my gut last year, not now with the antibiotic, because not only could I not eat foods, but like I had severe anemia and I had all these issues that because my mast cells were inflaming my body so much that I couldn't get nutrients and it was actually destroying my organs. Not everyone is at that level,
Wow.
but it's good to know that there is still hope, and that as if symptoms get worse, keep trying, keep putting in that work, because it most likely will pay off in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, and I'm sure your case will be an interesting study for your medical doctors to kind of figure out what's going on and how to help other people. So it's really important. And of course, everyone should always check with their doctors and things about this. Obviously, we're not giving medical advice here. This is just Keeya's experience, but we're not qualified to give medical advice. So do check with your doctors. But yeah, huge, isn't it?
I tell people I just write poop jokes, so I don't think you want to take medical advice from me. But showing my experience, that like I think the important takeaways are, hopefully we can talk about how it's affected my EDS and dysautonomia symptoms.
Yes, please.
That's an important takeaway. And then also just the effect that pain can have on your energy and your personality.
Oh, yes.
Because clearly I am a happy, active person, but I had a terrible health condition. And when you remove that inflammation, like maybe you're unstoppable. Don't assume that that's your personality. Or I wish I had been more gentle on myself. And I was a strong advocate for myself, but I wish I had been even more gentle and known how profoundly pain can impact your life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. Pain, we hear it all the time. It takes so much away from people. And, I think, you before, say in your previous, you did a pretty good job though, but you can see the change in you. And when I see you on Instagram and, the color in your cheeks and you're glowing, you're just like, wow. So tell us how the dysautonomia has changed then since the remission.
Yeah. So as I realized I was going into remission those first few weeks, I started having issues with intracranial pressure, and I realized my dysautonomia medication, fludrocortisone, which increases your blood volume, was making me sick. And when I ate the normal amount of salt that I usually ate for dysautonomia, it was making me sick. So I had to stop those treatments, and I realized that I was no longer feeling dizzy. I was no longer having numb legs. Temperature was no longer an issue for me. For example, I had been allergic to the sun for years. If I was out for 15 seconds, I could feel sick the rest of the day. And now I was like laying by the pool, like just wild. And so I took up things like, the first thing I did was I went on a paddle board in a lake, and then I stood on one leg just to push it, I did eventually fall in the lake because my practice was not that great. And but it was incredible that I eventually went in July, I went to California and I signed up for surfing lessons. And I surfed, and I got up every time. I got up my first time. And that's what's incredible, is that it really was like a switch for me. And I do, credit that I ran in agility with my dogs while I was sick, so that when remission happened, I was not atrophied. I certainly wasn't like incredibly strong, but all of a sudden I was playing pickleball I started running, I could start anything.
Yeah.
And so the wildest part, I think, is that I stopped having subluxations completely, and I stopped having what I consider EDS injuries. So like pulled tendons, joint pain. And I started playing like all the sports. At first, so what I went into remission and I signed up for your program, the Zebra Club. That was the first thing I did because I thought,
Yay.
okay, it's love it. Absolutely love it.
Oh,
and the reason I did that was because all of a sudden I had all this energy and all this like ambition and motivation. And I was worried, oh, I'm going to get out there and I'm just going to wreck my joints because I'm not going to know what to do. And it's connective tissue. So it can't change overnight. Like there's no way.
No,
and it was very helpful. Yeah, that was my thinking. So I was like, I'm going to learn all these things. I'm going to start with the basic exercises. And it was very helpful. I like remember your first class and learning about standing without locking your knees. And I was like, oh my, this, like, or like, just like learning how to lift your leg without like hooking the joint. I was like, oh boy, I have some real issues. That I was so sick with mast cell activation syndrome that I couldn't really dig into that, learn that. I didn't have the capacity. And I think that's a real struggle because these conditions, dysautonomia, ehlers-danlos syndrome, and mast cell activation syndrome, require an incredible amount of learning. And I focused on mast cell activation syndrome because it was life-threatening to me and I needed to like get those chemicals under control. Yeah. But I still am learning about joint instability and how to not hyperextend my joints. But I ended up doing all these sports and I didn't have any injuries. And so I discovered that my mast cell activation inflammation was contributing to my subluxations. I used to go for walks and twice a week, my hip would sublux. And now I take bar classes like 3 times a week with instructors who are knowledgeable about hypermobility and say like, stop, putting your hip way out there. Like, like they're very good about calling me out when I am hyperextending and shouldn't be. Yes. And tucking that pelvis and all that. I think it's been very helpful to work with people who can call me out because I am not aware of my body still, and I still need to learn that. Everyone needs to learn that. But that inflammation was really the driving force for me. And I was like flopping around on a surfboard, or I hiked Mount Rainier. That's higher altitude, and I didn't have any symptoms of dysautonomia. So, really digging into, if you suspect mast cell activation syndrome, learn about it, look for a specialist. Because even if you don't have huge symptoms, that inflammation may be contributing to your other conditions. Yes.
Yeah. Inflammation is the key to everything, I think. So gosh, that's so fascinating that it could have been contributing to the subluxations as well. Amazing.
And I remember right before I went to AKC Nationals in Tulsa, my subluxations were getting worse. Like I had a joint in my foot pop up into my foot, and I was like grounded, and I was having more often. And I was like, I know where this road is headed, and it's scary. And I have not had one since remission, and I've done all sorts of stupid things.
Wow.
And I just bought figure skates. So I was a figure skater as a child. I was a figure skater as a child, and I had all these injuries all the time, and no one knew what they were. And unfortunately, I was questioned that I was faking it. And it was a very hard experience for me because I loved the sport. It was very calming for my nervous system to like glide around the ice. But now I'm trying it again because I have the treatments to help keep the inflammation down, but also the support. Like there's so many more resources out there now.
Yeah.
And there's physical therapy, and people, my new coach that I meet on Friday knows about hypermobility. So it's very exciting.
Brilliant. That is awesome. How great is that? Oh, I look forward to hearing how you get on with your figure skating. That's honestly, it's just like one of those miracle stories, isn't it? It's just like, I'm just blown away by it. So you kind of hinted, you know, obviously everyone is very individual. You know, we don't know if this is something that's going to happen to everyone. You know, like you say, you've got to put those steps in place first, haven't you? Do you know
Absolutely.
anyone in all of your sort of research and everything? Do you know of anyone else? Have you come across anyone else who's had a similar experience?
So before I went into remission, I was aware of one other person who was put on a chemotherapy that put their mast cell activation syndrome into remission. You know, I didn't have access to biologics or chemotherapy, and I was kind of scared of them, so I didn't push for that. And then as I went into remission, I started hearing from people, and that is very interesting. I learned a lot about mast cell activation syndrome on support groups on Facebook, and they were like invaluable, helping me in the ER, making sure, you know, just like, oh, did you think about this? You know, again, not medical advice, but did you think about this? Advocate for yourself, you know, a lot of great support. But in those groups are severely sick people. And so, you know, they're self-selecting that they need help. And so you don't hear the success stories. You don't hear the you know, the people that have very mild symptoms that, you know, they don't even talk about them. And they use the first lines of treatment and they don't have symptoms anymore. Even that technically is remission too. It's just not as dramatic as my story. And I have heard from other people that have tried, you know, Xolair is a biologic that a lot of people have success with. There are different medications out there. And you just have to keep trying. And I truly believe that it will become more and more common. And the reason I share my story is not to brag, although my Instagram feed is pretty amazing. But it's to show doctors, this is what can happen when you treat mast cell activation syndrome. This is why we need research and better treatments, because it's life-changing. You get these chemicals under control and you can just, you know, unlock quality of life for people. And so I'm hoping that in some way I will help build the momentum towards mast cell research and access to better testing and treatment.
Absolutely. I would hope so as well, with everything you've done, and your story is amazing. So, gosh. And, you know, are you in the back of your mind a little bit worried that it might end, you know, the remission might end? I know it's a horrible question, but we don't want it to end, of course. But, you know, is there a little thought there?
I don't know if something's wrong with me, but no.
Good. Good.
Because I don't sit at home and I think about like, oh, could I be in a car accident? It's the same thing. Anything can happen to me, especially I'm doing all these like weird sports. I'm more likely to like break my leg doing figure skating. But I don't worry about that either, because when you do that, it takes away your joy. And the best part of this experience is like, I have been walking through the world for 7 months, like bursting with joy. And I make my friends and family uncomfortable sometimes. Like we were making s'mores and I was so excited because I hadn't been around fire with all the smoke and marshmallows. I don't even know what's in them, like chocolate, all this stuff. And I was so excited, and you can see me just like, it's coming out of every area of my body, this joy. And it makes people uncomfortable at first because adults have been trained to contain these emotions. And then they realize, like, I'm just having the best time of my life and it's contagious. And they get on board. I've had, people film me for Instagram. I'm not alone, obviously. People are taking pictures of me. And at first I was like, oh, they're going to think this is a chore or this is annoying. And then people started coming and like, oh, you want me to film a reel or like a TikTok? Because they want to experience it through my eyes. I feel like a child. Like, not only did I not get to experience so much, but I was in so much pain for so long that everything feels brand new. And I'm just like overwhelmed with emotion and gratitude. And I am not going to like tamper that down for anyone. Like, I was in too much pain for too long. I was on those hospital beds thinking I was going to die. Like, this is what life is about. And I'm just, hopefully creating joy, not only for myself, but other people, and affecting not only people with mast cell activation syndrome, but people all around me, showing, what happens when chronic illness is treated. And, that we all just want to enjoy life.
Oh, that was so beautifully put. Oh, and you're spot on. Why shouldn't we have joy and gratitude every day in our lives? Absolutely. Yeah. You're like your little dogs, and like my little doggy. Everything's like exciting and new and
Except we had some issues the first month of remission because I wore my dogs out so bad. Like, there was one day they were just like laying on their backs in the grass when we were trying to go for a walk, and I realized I had to exercise without my toy poodles because like they used to push me, and now I push them a little bit. So it was funny. I had to like, okay, well, you got to go to like bar class or something to get out your energy because your toy poodle can't keep up anymore. So
it's fantastic. So it's just, you think all this energy was there, wasn't it? But it was just not allowed to come out. I mean, that's so encouraging, because fatigue is such a big deal for most of our community. It stops so many things, and to think that it's there, but it's just kind of being pushed down all the time by these reactions. It's amazing.
And another thing I think that's really important is I had a lot of issues with relationships because I was not supported in the way that I needed to be supported.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is when I went into remission, all of a sudden, I was just happy to be around people. It didn't matter who they were. And all of those issues disappeared. And I think not only did I change, I didn't have that pain anymore. And so little things didn't bother me. Like, I could have held on to those grudges, but it like wasn't even worth it. Like, I was so happy I didn't care anymore. And I think that my friends and family that were kind of on the edge of being supportive, they saw like, oh wow, she was in so much pain. Like, they didn't realize until I went into remission the level of pain I was in, and that just like even my face, like the glowing, the smiling, the literally bouncing around, it changed them. And now, like, my friend was laughing because I was like, oh, I'm hanging out with my mom tonight again. Like 4 days a week, I hang out with all sorts of people. I thought I was an introvert. I am not an introvert. I am most definitely an extrovert. And I can just enjoy, people are different. They don't always understand, and sometimes they're challenging, but I can just embrace the positive aspects and like move on when it isn't working for me. Absolutely. And I have had conversations about like, well, back then I really needed you. I wasn't making this up. And so we have had conversations, but mostly I just kind of love everyone in my life, and we have a good time.
Oh, that's beautiful. And carrying grudges and things around, that's going to increase our stress anyway, isn't it? In a sense,
absolutely.
we're just harming ourselves anyway. So let's just get rid of it, like you say.
Yes.
What's the point when you've got so much? You know, it's just not important anymore, is it? So.
Yep. It's like, do you want to go play pickleball? No. Okay, that's it.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. As I say, it's an extraordinary story. Now, just moving away from sort of the remission side, I know you've been working on a project with Dr. Linda Bluestein, who people will know because she was our guest in the previous episode. So if you might have already met Linda Bluestein, who shared a lot with us on our previous podcast. So what have the two of you been up to? You've been doing a little something together. What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people feared that I'd go into remission and then I'd just like stop doing ehlers-danlos and mast cells, and the absolute opposite has happened. I have all this energy and I'm so excited to help other patients and to take what I've learned and to help make resources. So I partnered with Dr. Bluestein to create a course called Maximizing Your Appointments for Complex Disease. Mm-hmm. And so I work in government relations. I have been professionally trained in advocacy. That being said, I still struggled with how to advocate for myself in doctor's appointments. And I don't, doctors are trained to be doctors, but patients are not trained how to be patients. Yeah. And I want to help provide resources of how to prepare for your appointments, how to connect with your doctors, and how to advocate for your body. And there's a lot that I've learned in partnering with other healthcare professionals about the constraints and pressures that they're under that no one teaches patients. For example, a lot of the doctors for complex disease move to private practice in the US. Mm-hmm. And so they don't take health insurance. And that's because like the reimbursement rates aren't good. And they have all these financial pressures. But I hear all the time patients saying, well, the doctors are greedy. Well, they're not making a ton of money. They're trying to figure things out. And so how do we work together as patients and doctors so that we can, get healthier and create more resources? So I'm so excited working with Dr. Bluestein. I've learned a lot from her, and I've made her video it for me and put it down and, make PDF resources so that, there are ways that there are tools that you can bring to your appointments, and you don't have to feel like you're navigating it alone.
Yes. Wow, that's going to be so valuable. I think that's going to be a very popular course. Amazing. I look forward to seeing that. Very good. Very good. So when do you think that will be ready? When can people sort of find out about
it? Should be launching in late November. It'll be on ehlers-danlos.com and on my social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Dr. Bluestein as well. Plus, we have some amazing social media content coming out. I love that I have, I'm a humor blogger, so this course will not be boring. I'm not going to make a boring course myself. So it'll have a little edge to it.
I'm sure.
But Dr. Bluestein has been so amazing to did some fun dances with me and some skits for Instagram reels. So I'm excited to share that with everyone. And I think it's so important to know we are a community and we're working to make these experiences better. We can't solve mast cell activation syndrome overnight. It takes a long time to make progress. Yes. But we're in it together, and you don't have to feel like you are just by yourself.
Yeah, very important, really important, because there's nothing worse than feeling on your own and nobody understands. And so that's going to be so valuable. So thank you for creating that. Look out for that for when it comes out. So And what does the future hold then for you and your two boys, your two little poodles? What's going on for the future?
So they're 11 and 12. They're slowing down a bit, but we do agility some on the weekends. And I just really enjoy the time with them and just seeing Quixote has arthritis. So he's learning how to slow down on the obstacles himself, that he doesn't have to power through and then pull out of the course because he's in pain. It's very interesting. We keep doing it because it does keep their joints healthy. So don't worry, I'm not pushing them through.
No, it's important.
Yeah. So it's fun to see them in a weird way get older and cuddlier, and I can be there for them in a way that I haven't been able to before, because I would have to get help with my dogs all the time because I was, couldn't get off the couch. And then for me, who knows? But I am taking up figure skating. That'll be exciting. And then in early next year, I plan on going on a ski trip, which is super fun. I'm in Minnesota and we have snow here all the time. So I'm going to try all the snow sports, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, and then downhill skiing. Perhaps in California in early next year. I had really bad vertigo from mast cell activation syndrome. And I remember the last time I tried to ski, I gave myself a black eye. So
how did you do that?
So hopefully, that's an accomplishment. It was like 10 years ago, I went to Big Sky and somehow I fell in a way that gave myself a black eye. But I just have to keep trying things and figure out what I enjoy and and not lock my joints in the process.
Exactly. Very important. Yeah. Oh, how exciting. So, well, I look forward to hearing all, and seeing on your Instagram all your journeys, and long may it continue forever, It's fantastic. And as I said at the beginning, if you look back at our podcast last year in season 1, it's a very different story, actually. And I think Keeya looks very different to how she looks today. And if you haven't watched it, go and have a little look. And I bet you can see the difference between, last year and this year. It's a very, very fascinating story. So thank you so much for sharing everything with us. And so we mentioned your website, so ehlers-danlos.com. So if people want to connect with you, so we've got your website, we've got Instagram. Anywhere else we can get hold of you?
That's pretty good. On my website, there's a sign up for emails. Sometimes in the middle of the night, have a funny story I send out. I'm there for the humor. So if you like chronic illness jokes, definitely follow me on social media. So
and it's nice, because it I like it because it's good not to be serious all the time. Life can be very serious when you're living with a chronic illness, and it's just nice to lighten it up a little bit. And humor is good. I like it.
Humor is medicine for sure.
Yeah, laughter is medicine, isn't it? It's going to boost your immunity for sure. So reduce stress levels.
Yeah.
So it's all good. It's all going in the right direction. So brilliant. Well, thank you. So that's how you can get in touch with Keeya and follow her on Instagram, because it's a great account. I love seeing her stories. They're always entertaining, and as she says, they're always humorous and fun, and a little bit of poking fun at herself. She's not afraid to do that. So it's all good. Highly recommend it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our guest, and thank you, everyone, for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Keeya. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the box below, and we will definitely reply. I always reply. I know Keeya does as well, actually, because you've done that last year. So don't, pop it in the box and we will respond. So thank you again. And until next time, keep moving.